Well, speaking of conflict in the Middle East, let's talk about a major geopolitical shift in Syria. This is something that I see taking place that could cause some major problems for the United States and Israel there in the region. Let's go back just a little bit and put this in context. In Syria, to try to topple the government of Bashar al-Assad, what the United States is doing is what they started out doing was trying to repeat what worked for them well in Libya. So in Libya, what the CIA did was they went in and they backed a bunch of mercenary militias, armed them, gave them support to try and overthrow the government of Muammar Gaddafi. And to help them out, to help these militias out, they supplemented the strength of those militias by using NATO airstrikes. Now, for those who don't know exactly what NATO is an international police force, military force. It's supposed to be a confederation of militaries from a lot of different nations, from all of these different NATO members. But basically, 70% of NATO forces are U.S. military troops. 15% of them are British forces, and the remaining 15%, that comes from the remaining NATO countries. So the truth is that NATO is really just the United States military operating under a different name. That way the American people are not going to be as quick to be concerned at all of the warfare and warmongering going on out there. Well, the mercenary militias, with the help of these NATO airstrikes, they were successful in toppling the government there in Libya. Turned the place into a complete, it's insane what's going on in Libya, how bad it's gotten. Well, after this success, the CIA then sent a lot of these mercenary fighters from Libya up into Iraq and into Syria to join forces with the existing militia units that the CIA was already working with and that the Israeli Mossad was already working with. And these are al-Qaeda forces that were there. So when these Libyan mercenaries went up and joined with the al-Qaeda forces in Syria and Iraq, when they merged, that was the creation of ISIS. That's when ISIS, the Islamic State, was formed. And the CIA then tried to repeat in Syria what it had done in Libya by using these terrorists. And so these mercenaries wreaked havoc across the Syrian lands. They were killing the people. They were trying to overthrow the government. And for a time, it was working well. ISIS took control of the oil-rich areas in Syria. They took control of most of the country's major cities, the densely populated city centers. And they even surrounded the capital, which is Damascus, and they were on the verge of victory. But Syria is different. There were three problems in Syria that made this Syrian coup attempt more difficult than what it had gone on there in Libya. The first thing is that there were so many different groups that the United States was backing. There's all these, lots of different militia groups, tons of them, dozens and dozens of these. There were so many of them that bringing them all together to work toward a single common purpose, it was very difficult because they each had their own individual agendas aside from just wanting to topple the government. So fights broke out between different rival factions. And I put something up on my website a handful of days ago, footage of ISIS actually fighting Jaish al-Islam, which is another U.S.-backed force. And so fighting broke out within the ranks of these new forces, and they split they divided, with some of the Al-Qaeda affiliates splitting away from ISIS, saying, ISIS, you guys are too much. You're too extreme. And that's telling you something when Al-Qaeda says you're too extreme. So this unified mercenary front against the Syrian government, it just crumbled. It fell apart. So that's the first problem. Second problem is that ISIS is so bloodthirsty that the United States just had to back away from some of its support. And that's when Obama came out and was talking about, oh, we only support moderate rebels. The truth is the CIA created ISIS. It's a Frankenstein monster, just like Victor Frankenstein in Mary Shelley's book. He creates this thing. He doesn't know what he's doing. He's got ideas. He creates this thing. It comes to life, and then it turns on him, and he can't control it. He doesn't know what to do. Well, the CIA created ISIS. They nurtured it. They armed them. But this monster got out of control. ISIS was ravaging the population. They were selling children into the sex slave trade. They were raping thousands of women. They were literally butchering thousands of people. And it's horrifying. I've seen some of this footage and photos of entire ISIS compounds that were devoted just to harvesting organs from their victims to sell on the black market. It's like literally they go into these meat processing places, and you've got hanging up on the hooks, hanging from the ceiling, torsos and nothing else. The arms have been cut off, they're in one pile. The legs are cut off, they're in another pile. Heads are cut off, they're over there. They take the torsos down, they cut them open and pull out the hearts and just disgusting. Really messes with your head when you see this stuff. But that's what ISIS was doing. They were making money on the black market selling these organs. So hiding support for these devils, this became a problem for the CIA, trying to cover up that they were actually working with them. All right, so that's the second problem. Third problem with this CIA plot to overthrow the Syrian government is that, unlike Libya, Syria invited in foreign militaries to come to their aid and help them keep from getting toppled. So Iran and Russia, the Lebanese Hezbollah paramilitary force, they all come in. And even Turkey had some militias that they were backing. So these foreign countries come in, there's all these different militias working, and they're pushing back against the CIA mercenaries. So this entry of Russia and Iran into Syria changed the whole game. So the United States responded by illegally entering Syria directly and conducting their own U.S. Air Force strikes against the forces fighting to keep Syria propped up. But the bigger problem that the United States had to deal with was the fact that Russia was wiping ISIS out. For about a year, Russia was doing this all on their own, them and the Syrians. Wiping out Russia. And it appeared that the oil fields that the CIA was controlling through ISIS looked like they were going to fall back under the control of the Syrian government. Heaven forbid the Syrian people should get back their own oil fields. So there was just way too much money being made from the sale of illegal oil, routing it up through Turkey. President Erdogan of Turkey was certainly getting his cut. Well, there was too much money being made, and the CIA loves this money. They run the poppy fields in Afghanistan, and they were selling illegal oil and the human slave trade. They had a hand in that. They were getting money for black ops. So they didn't want to let these oil fields fall back into the hands of Syria. So what the CIA did with air support and ground support from the U.S. military is they armed the Kurdish population up in the north, and they helped to transition control of these oil fields from ISIS to the Kurds. It was a pretty convenient handoff. Previously, ISIS had been killing Kurds, but now the USA is backing the Kurds, and they move ISIS out, bring the Kurds in, and the Kurds take control of the oil fields. Now, of course, this outraged President Erdogan of Turkey because the Turks consider the Kurds to be terrorists. but this served the purposes, the geostrategic purposes of the CIA. So as it stands now, we've got the Kurds who are in control of these oil-rich regions in northern Syria. They and their U.S. military support personnel, they're up there on the northern side of the Euphrates River. And the Syrian coalition, with the Russian support, they're across the river. You've got the USA and the Kurds up here. Here's the river. And then you've got the Syrians and the Russians down here on the other side of the Euphrates. It's a battle scenario that is straight out of the pages of the Bible, for those familiar with the scriptures. But I can share some new information with you now about something going on that could very well shift this balance of power. The Kurds are spread through several different countries. They're really a nation unto themselves, an ethnic group of people that, because of the way after the world wars, the way that the Western powers carved up the region, they left the Kurds without a nation of their own. So you've got Kurds that are spread out over a large swath of territory, going from Turkey, Syria, Iraq, and even into Iran. So you've got the Turkish Kurds, Syrian Kurds, Iraqi Kurds, Iranian Kurds, and in some of those countries, Iraq and Iran, for example, they give them a certain degree of autonomy over their own region. And so far, the Kurdish forces in Syria, they've been working with the United States. But this week, something happened that's making it look like things may be changing. Kurdish representatives from both the Syrian and Iraqi Kurdish populations, they met with their counterparts from the Iranian Kurds. And they're looking at what is on the horizon. They're looking what happens after all of these things change. Where are we going to be? How are we going to fare when all of this is over? So there's serious talk about, among these various Kurdish factions, of shrugging off the United States and realigning themselves with the governments of Iran and Syria, because they think that it's going to be a better deal for them. And of course, Russia is playing a role in all of these negotiations as well. And that's because what Russia and Iran want to see is a stable Syria. That's in their best interests. And they know that the United States is trying to balkanize Syria, meaning since the United States hasn't been able to overthrow the government, they're accepting, okay, we're not getting this done. So what we want to do is to carve it up into different pieces and keep the oil-rich sections for ourselves. That's basically the United States plan at this point. And that's what the U.S. military's been doing since Donald Trump took over. So they're using the Kurds to hold some of these sections, but Russia knows that if Syria is going to last, you can't do this. The Syrian government down in Damascus needs to have control over its own oil resources. That's major income for the country. So efforts are being made to gain the favor of the Kurds in Syria who control these oil fields so that they will basically turn against the United States. So what I'm seeing in the news that I've been reading is that Iranian Kurdish officials are telling the Syrian Kurds that their mutual enemy Israel is working with the United States to chop up Syria, and they all have the basic understanding that when this is all over, the Israelis and the Americans are going to stab the Kurds in their backs. So the Iranian Kurds are pushing their Syrian counterparts to ally themselves with Iran and with Syria instead of with the USA. And these Iranian officials are even pointing out, quite correctly, I might add, that the Christian population in Syria has gotten firmly behind Bashar al-Assad against the Americans and the Israelis. That ought to tell you something. You Christian Zionists who are out there supporting Israel and supporting America, those people who are in Syria, who are Christian, they know that they have a better chance of survival by supporting Bashar al-Assad and the existing Syrian regime than going along with the Zionists. That ought to tell you. So speaking of Q, so over in Iraq, these the Kurdish forces who helped the Americans, they're also feeling used. They feel tossed aside by the USA after everything that they've done to help the United States in its military goals. So if the Kurds decide to realign their loyalties, this is going to be a major game changer. Big, big deal. So anyway, I just thought that my fellow geopolitical wonks out there might find that news interesting. I certainly think that this is going to be a major trend. It could possibly, if the United States does think that the Kurds are turning against them, we could very well see a resurgence of ISIS again, a growing strength to ISIS, because that's what the CIA did to start with. They were backing ISIS, and they were taking the oil fields and pushing out the Kurdish population. So we'll see what happens. Guys, I want to close this video with one last story. Yesterday, I received a very thoughtful letter from a woman from Damascus. And she asked that I not share any of her personal details publicly out of concern for her family, safety of her family. And I definitely agree. But so what I'll say is that based on what I read and my own thoughts on this, is that the mess going on in Syria, it's not black and white. Just like here in the United States and in most countries, there are diverse opinions on how things should be done. And that's certainly the case in Syria. The people of Syria have opinions on who their leaders should be and how the affairs of the government should be handled. And there certainly has been persecution in the past. And even I wouldn't doubt that there's persecution now to an extent. Here in the United States, we've got some pretty good fights between political factions, right? Some people only think in Democrat versus Republican. So we've got some people who hated Obama with such passion they would have done anything to remove that guy from office. Called him the Antichrist. Now we've got a Republican, Donald Trump, and people are saying the same thing about him. He's the Antichrist. And it's obvious from the day-to-day news that we are seeing in the mainstream media that there are a significant number of people in America who would love to see control of the government flip from Republican control to Democrat control in Congress so that the Democrats could try to impeach the president. We're a divided nation when it comes to politics. These are domestic squabbles that divide us. But I guarantee you, think back to how it happened after 9/11 when Democrats jumped behind President George W. Bush. I guarantee you that if an outside power were to try to invade our country tomorrow or try to attack our nation in a big way, we would see Democrats and Republicans set aside their differences, come together and unite behind President Trump, rally together against the common enemy. That's how we are. And that's very much how it is in Syria today. Some people know that the Syrian government in the past has been very repressive. Bashar al-Assad's father was not the best of people. And there are things continuing today that are not good. And there are plenty of Syrians who would like to see power removed from Assad and for the country to go a different political direction. But despite these strong differences inside of Syria, this outside interference from the United States and other Western nations has brought these differing factions inside Syria, has brought them together against a common foe. Just like it happened in America after 9/11. And just like a husband and a wife might strongly disagree, have a knockdown, drag-out argument about something, they would not permit some neighbor, some third party to come over and intervene in their marriage and say, this is what you're going to do, and I'm going to make you do it, since you two can't agree. That's not going to happen. How the married couple sorts out their problems is their business. Yeah, they can fight, but it's them. It's their business, not anyone else's. So how the Syrians handle their internal politics, that's the business of the Syrian people. It's not the place of a foreign empire to interject itself into their internal affairs and try to force anything on them, especially when what we're trying to force on them is a puppet government that we control so we can exploit their resources. So anyway, what the author of the letter stressed to me is that there are matters inside Syria that the people will need to deal with. When all this is over and things are settled down, there are going to be issues that they're going to want to deal with inside their own government. But that's for them to decide, not for the people of America, not for our government, and certainly not for Israel to decide. Back in 2012, when I was working for Ron Paul, for his Congressman Ron Paul when he was running for president, in one of the Republican debates, he was booed on the debate stage. And it was so shameful that what he was booed for, because, in fact, I'll just tell you what he said, because I believe what he said was right. He said that the United States should have a humble foreign policy that is based on the golden rule. So if we don't want a foreign power to come into America and do something to us or tell us what to do or try and change our government, we shouldn't do that to them. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And I think that's a very wise piece of counsel, not only regarding U.S. foreign policy, but just about everything in our lives. Don't try and force your will on other people. Let people make their own choices for themselves, as long as they are not infringing on the rights of another person or doing harm to others. Let people make up their own minds about how they're going to do things. Get the federal government out of our lives to the extent that is appropriate, which is pretty much all the way. And don't let the federal government and the U.S. State Department go intermeddle in the affairs of Syria, Iran, Sudan, Somalia, and we could name probably dozens of countries. It's not our place, not our business, not our fight. So anyway, to the very kind woman who sent me that letter, I do appreciate it. It was a very good letter. I sincerely appreciate it. Well, that's it, folks, for this episode. Thank you so much for watching. And if there's anything that I can do for you guys or subjects to talk about, please let me know down in the comments section, and maybe I'll be able to get that to that in an upcoming video. For Blackstone Intelligence, I'm Jake Morphonios.
Andrew Jackson had a pretty clear-cut idea about America's enemies. Kill them. Congressman Paul, 30 seconds, please. 30 seconds to respond, since you were mentioned.
My point is if another country does to us what we do others, we're not going to like it very much. So I would say that maybe we ought to consider a golden rule in foreign policy. Don't do to other nations what we don't want to have them do to us. So we endlessly bomb these countries, and then we wonder why they get upset with us, and yet it continues on and on. I mean, this idea that we can't debate foreign policy, then all we have to do is start another war. I mean, it's warmongering. They're building up for another war against Iran, and people can't wait to get in another war. This country doesn't need another war. We need to quit the ones we're in. We need to save the money and bring our troops home.
If you appreciate hard-hitting investigative journalism that you won't get from the mainstream media, then please support Jake's research and analysis at patreon.com/endtimesnewsreport, paypal.me/endtimesnewsreport, or send a check or money order to Jake Morphonios, P.O. Box 1333, Kernersville, North Carolina 27285.